The sun had long since abandoned the small town of Redemption, leaving behind a crimson haze that clung to the crumbling buildings like a bad omen. It was a place where time seemed to stagnate, where the air reeked of desperation and the skies wept with a perpetual gray sadness. In the local diner, a gathering of misfits huddled over cups of rust-brown coffee, swapping tales of small-town horror. There was Jasper, the one-armed janitor with a penchant for the macabre; Rachel, the punk rock waitress with a penchant for all things morbid; and Cade, the lanky, mullet-sporting truck driver with a fondness for the supernatural. As they spoke, a faded pickup truck rattled into town, spewing exhaust fumes and dust. The diner's patrons fell silent, their eyes fixed on the stranger who climbed out, his face pale as stretched parchment, his eyes sunken pits of darkness. He moved with an unnerving deliberation, as if each step was a choreographed dance of damnation. Rachel, always one for the dramatic, leaned in, her voice hushed. "You think that's the fella they've been talking about? The one who came from elsewhere?" Cade snorted, a hairy nostril flaring in amusement. "Ah, shucks. Ratch, you don't believe them rumors, do ya? Just some city slicker looking for a place to lay low." Jasper, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the newcomer with an unnerving intensity, his one arm flexing as if itching for the feel of his trusty baseball bat. "Bertha." The stranger's eyes scanned the diner, lingering on each patron before settling on Jasper. For an instant, the two locked gazes, and the air seemed to thicken with an unseen tension. Then, the stranger's face slackened, his eyes clouding like a stormy horizon. "Name's Elijah," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like the rustling of dry leaves. "I've been driving for a while. Needed a place to stop." Cade, ever the charmer, flashed a crooked smile. "Well, Elijah, you've come to the right place. Redemption's the kind of town where you can get lost for a while." Elijah's gaze never wavered, his eyes boring into Jasper's very soul. "I'm not looking to get lost. I'm looking for something." Rachel's brow furrowed, her pierced nose twitching with curiosity. "What's that?" Elijah's smile was a cadaverous thing, a grimace that sent shivers down the spines of the diner's patrons. "I'm searching for a show. A horror show, they called it. Supposed to be the most terrifying thing anyone's ever seen." The diner's patrons exchanged uneasy glances. Jasper's grip on Bertha tightened, his knuckles whitening. Cade's grin faltered, his eyes darting towards the door as if searching for an escape route. Rachel's face paled, her black eyeliner seeming to smear into a sad, gothic smear. "You mean the show they had out at the old drive-in?" she stammered. Elijah's nod was a slow, deliberate thing, his eyes glinting with an otherworldly intensity. "That's the one. I heard it was different, something that'd change you forever." The diner's patrons exchanged uneasy glances, their faces reflecting the same unspoken thought. No one who'd seen the horror show had ever been the same again, and Elijah, with his sunken eyes and funereal smile, seemed to know it. The diner's patrons lapsed into an uncomfortable silence, the only sound the soft hum of the neon sign outside and the creaking of the worn vinyl booths. Jasper's grip on Bertha relaxed, his gaze never leaving Elijah's face. "You know, friend," Jasper said, his voice low and even, "that show's not something you want to go looking for. It's not healthy." Elijah's smile widened, his eyes glinting with an unsettling enthusiasm. "That's exactly why I need to see it. I've heard it's an experience unlike any other." Rachel's eyes darted towards the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't want to go messing with that, Elijah. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Elijah's laughter was a dry, mirthless thing, like the rustling of dead leaves. "I've seen some things in my time, Rachel. I think I can handle it." Cade, ever the opportunist, sensed an angle. "Hey, now, I might know a thing or two about that show. If you're willing to pay top dollar, I might be able to facilitate an introduction." Elijah's gaze snapped towards Cade, his eyes narrowing like a rifle scope. "How much?" Cade named a figure that made Rachel's eyes widen in shock, but Elijah merely nodded, his smile growing more cadaverous by the second. As the deal was struck, the diner's patrons seemed to shrink away, as if they knew they were witnessing a pact with something dark and ancient. Jasper's grip on Bertha tightened once more, his eyes fixed on Elijah with a mixture of fascination and horror. Outside, the crimson haze deepened, casting long shadows across the crumbling buildings of Redemption. It was as if the very town itself was watching, waiting for the horror show to begin. Cade, ever the wheeler dealer, pulled out a crumpled map from his truck's glove compartment. "All right, Elijah, I'll take you to the old drive-in, but you gotta promise me one thing. You gotta come back and tell us what you saw." Elijah's smile was a cold, mirthless thing. "I'll be back, and I'll tell you everything." As they departed, the diner's patrons watched with a mix of fascination and trepidation. Rachel's eyes were wide with a morbid curiosity, while Jasper's gaze seemed to bore into Elijah's very soul. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Redemption in a dark, velvety shadow. The night air was heavy with anticipation, the very fabric of reality seeming to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Cade's truck rumbled to life, spewing exhaust fumes into the night air as they drove towards the abandoned drive-in. The stars twinkled like ice chips in the sky, and the wind carried the faint whisper of distant screams. As they approached the drive-in, the rusted hulk of a screen loomed before them, its speaker posts like skeletal fingers reaching towards the moon. Elijah's eyes gleamed with an unholy excitement, his face aglow with an otherworldly hunger. "This is it," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where they showed the horror show." Elijah's door creaked open, and he stepped into the darkness, his feet crunching on the gravelly earth. The night air seemed to close in around him, the shadows coalescing into dark, twisted shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the flickering moonlight. "Wait," Cade called out, his voice laced with a hint of warning. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Elijah." But Elijah didn't look back. He strode towards the screen, his footsteps echoing through the abandoned drive-in, his eyes fixed on some unseen horror that lurked beyond the reaches of the mortal realm. As Elijah vanished into the darkness, Cade's truck roared to life, its tires spitting gravel as he made a hasty retreat. The drive-in's rusty screen seemed to loom larger, its silence oppressive, as if it waited for Elijah's return. Back in the diner, Jasper's gaze never left the door, his eyes fixed on the spot where Elijah had last been seen. Rachel's nervous chatter died on her lips, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You think he's really going to come back?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jasper's face was a granite mask, his voice low and even. "I don't know, Rachel, but if he does, I'll be ready." The diner's neon sign creaked in the wind, casting an eerie glow over the deserted streets of Redemption. The night air seemed to thicken, the shadows twisting into grotesque, living things that watched and waited. In the darkness, Elijah approached the screen, the silence broken only by the soft crunch of gravel beneath his feet. The air was heavy with an electric sense of anticipation, the very fabric of reality seeming to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. As he reached the screen, a figure emerged from the shadows, its features indistinct in the darkness. Elijah's eyes locked onto the figure, his gaze mesmerized by the horror that lurked beyond. "Welcome," the figure whispered, its voice like a sighing wind. "The show is about to begin." Elijah's smile was a cold, mirthless thing, his eyes aglow with an unholy excitement. "I've been waiting." And with that, the night itself seemed to unfold, revealing secrets that were better left unseen. The horror show had begun, and Elijah was its captive audience. The figure raised its hand, and the screen behind it flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned drive-in. Elijah's eyes remained fixed on the figure, his gaze hypnotized by the horror that lurked beyond. The screen's rusty speakers crackled, spewing forth a cacophony of screams, wails, and mad, cackling laughter. The air seemed to thicken, the shadows twisting into grotesque, living things that capered and danced in the flickering light. Elijah's smile grew wider, his eyes aglow with an unholy excitement. He took a step forward, his feet seeming to move of their own accord, as if drawn by some unseen force. The figure raised its hand again, and the screen's lights dimmed, plunging the drive-in into darkness. Elijah's eyes adjusted slowly, and he saw that the figure had vanished, replaced by a vision that defied human comprehension. The screen showed a world gone mad, where twisted creatures capered and danced in a realm of eternal darkness. Elijah's mind reeled, his sanity stretched to the breaking point by the horrors that unfolded before him. And yet, he could not look away. He was transfixed, his eyes glued to the screen as the show unfolded, a cavalcade of terror that threatened to consume his very soul. Back in the diner, Jasper's grip on Bertha tightened, his eyes fixed on the door as if he sensed the horror that lurked beyond. Rachel's eyes were wide with fear, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Outside, the night air seemed to writhe and twist, as if reality itself was unraveling thread by thread. The stars twinkled like ice chips in the sky, and the wind carried a faint whisper of screams, echoing from the depths of the abandoned drive-in. The horror show had begun, and Elijah was its captive audience, trapped in a realm of madness from which there was no escape.